The last thing you'll hear. The smell of the Necromancer's laboratory always seemed to change daily. Many days, an odor of death fogged heavy in the air. On others, the sharp smell of chemicals and fresh poisons would stab at the nostrils and mask the other smells. For the man whose job it was to sweep the floors and clean the vials, one thing was certain: none of the smells were pleasant. Dante shuddered to think what could have possibly left the residue inside the bowl he was cleaning. He tugged at his shirt and pulled it over the bottom half of his face, hoping to shield himself better from the odor emanating from the bowl as he scrubbed it dry. "Out!" a demanding voice cried as the laboratory doors flung open. Dante gripped the bowl firmly as he flinched. "I have business to attend to, and I don't need you in here skulking about," the Necromancer elaborated. Dante frowned over his shoulder as he stared back at the Necromancer. Vincent Creed was a master of his craft. The number of times that man had broken the laws of life and nature, and in what ways, was something Dante dared not consider. "Is your hearing as bad as your back?" Vincent asked in a more hushed tone. "Sorry, sir," Dante whispered politely before setting down the bowl. He then turned and began to shuffle from the room as best he could. One of his legs wouldn't bend at the knee as he walked, and the slouch of his back added extra difficulty to balance. Vincent exhaled sharply through his nose as he watched Dante leave the room. Perhaps it was time to scrap the hired help for parts. "Not a bad time, I hope," another voice spoke out, the tone far more well-spoken than the raspy Vincent. "Come in," Vincent offered as he turned to face the door behind him. As if being conjured from the shadows themselves, 3 men in black stepped from the darkness of the hallway outside and into the laboratory. Their movements were purposeful and elegant, and their footsteps were as light as air. The man in the center was dressed in dark but elegant garb. The 2 men on either side of him were dressed in almost skin-tight leather armor and black hoods. The man in the center smiled in greeting, but did not offer his hand, as he never did. "What do you have for us today, Creed?" asked Oliver Arkwright, a high-ranking member within the Thieves' Guild. Outside, Dante was struggling his way around the empty boxes and piles of rubbish in the Necromancer's alley. He flung a new sack of garbage from his shoulder and added it to the pile of trash before looking left and right cautiously. No one else was in the alley, nor could he hear the footsteps of anyone approaching. Dante took one concentrated breath as he shrugged off the demeanor of his act. Rolling his shoulders, he pulled off the cloak he was wearing with the fake hump in the back, so as to allow himself better movement. With a firm leap, he grabbed the side of the wall and began to climb it. The Necromancer's current abode was a 2-story building with stone walls. The laboratory was on the 2nd floor. Dante bit his lip gently as he climbed. The stone edges jutting from the wall did not offer much to grip on, and he could feel the rough corners cutting and bruising at his fingertips. After some degree of struggle, he reached the underside of the window of the laboratory. He closed his eyes and concentrated to hush out the noises of the city around him, so as to better focus on the whispered dealings within the Necromancer's lab. "It took me quite some time to master this one," Vincent chuckled with a raspy tone as he opened a small wooden box and produced his most recent experiment. "An empty bottle?" Arkwright asked with genuine curiosity. "A dying scream," Vincent corrected him, before gripping the cork and pulling it from the bottle. At that moment, a horrid noise shook the air itself. The shrieking wail of a woman in horrid pain cried out. It gripped at the hearts of every man present, and tugged at them as if trying to rip the living souls from their body. Outside, Dante trembled against the stone wall and struggled to keep his grip. The echoing sound of a dying woman whispered up and down the alley walls behind him. "What was that?" Arkwright whispered as he took in a sharp breath. "Like I said, a dying scream. I perfected a spell which allowed me to pull the last cry of life from a dying victim." Vincent smiled with eerie pride as he corked the now empty bottle and set it to the side. "And what applications would such a thing possibly have?" Arkwright asked. "More than you might think. There is a lot of power in these screams. Consider how many years of life were left inside the victim's body, how much willpower, love, and hope was stirring inside them before being stolen away. An entire life, summarized into a single sound. That is what you just heard. That is why the mere sound of it carries so much weight. In the right hands, having this kind of power bottled will yield a great deal of arcane possibilities. But, at any rate, the typical screams I have here are not why I brought you here today. Oh, Arkwright asked as he regarded the bottles on the shelf. Why am I here, then? For this, Vincent explained as he pulled a different bottle from the shelf. A Banshee scream. Outside, Dante was struggling harder to keep his grip. Pain was starting to vibrate up and down his forearms and shins as he tried to maintain his position. It had become clear to him how imperative it was to hear this conversation. A Banshee, Arkwright asked as he stepped closer to the bottle. Vincent quickly held up a hand in caution, holding the bottle protectively. It is a ghastly creature born of sorrow. Their wail makes them a scourge to living men. If a Banshee is strong enough, their scream becomes so horrid that merely hearing it will kill a man instantly. Arkwright's eyes began to widen at the seemingly empty bottle in the Necromancer's grasp. What you're telling me, Vincent, is that you're holding bottled death. Indeed. If I were to pull this cork, every man present would be dead before they could even process what they were hearing. How did you come by such a thing? Arkwright asked. How I harvest the scream from my victims is a trade secret, I'm afraid. As for how I acquired the Banshee, there was one terrorizing some farms south of Blackwell. I had been contemplating how to capture it when I was struck by a moment of simple brilliance and hired a deaf mercenary. I gave him a bottle already embedded with the harvesting spell, and well, here we have the end result. How do you know he didn't just bring you back an empty bottle? Arkwright suggested with a grin. Always thinking from the viewpoint of a con man, aren't you? Well, I can assure you, I'm quite attuned to such things. As I hold this bottle right now, I can promise you just through the feeling in my fingertips that this bottle does indeed contain the lethal wail of a dying Banshee. What makes you think I would want to purchase such a thing? Well, you're the creative one, aren't you? I can't use it for any of my spells. Opening the bottle isn't an option for me. But I thought a man like yourself could use such a thing as a weapon. Think of it like an explosive, only more lethal. Imagine the applications of being able to kill everyone in an entire room instantly, with no trace of what happened, just a harmless, empty bottle. Arkwright stroked his chin gently as he considered the bottle. Perhaps someone could be tricked into opening it, or it could even be attached to some sort of trap which would smash it open at an appropriate time. Would you be able to get more if I needed them? This is the only one I have in stock at the moment, Vincent explained as he wrapped the bottle in cloth and set it back on the shelf. If you hear word through your various grapevines of another Banshee, I could harvest another scream and give you a discount for the lead. Sounds like a deal. I'll take the one you have. We also have a few apprentice sorcerers within the guild's ranks. We could probably make use of the standard screams in their spells, so I'll take a dozen of those while I'm here. Dante choked back a gasp as he lost his grip. His body rolled as he instinctively tucked his limbs and hit the garbage below with a rolling thud. His head darted back up to look at the window above, certain that the Necromancer or the thieves would poke their heads out at any moment and spot him. His heart punched the inside of his rib cage for a few moments, and then began to relax. No one came to the window. No one seemed to notice. Either the sound had gone unheard, or they simply assumed the crash was someone tossing more garbage into the alley. Nightfall would come quickly, and Dante had to act fast. He knew the thieves would probably stay in town overnight, but by daybreak they would be long gone, along with the lethal scream in their possession. As the sun began to set on the horizon, Dante shuffled along in his costume towards a nearby stable. He approached a man pitching hay into an open stall, then looked left and right before speaking gently. I need to talk with you. It's a matter of great urgency, Dante whispered pleadingly. The stable worker turned and regarded Dante a moment before shrugging softly. I think you may have me confused with someone else, friend. Dante reached into his robe and withdrew a single piece of paper. Upon it was the secret seal of the king's royal inquisitors. The stable worker face turned grave before reaching into his pocket and producing an identical seal. When I was dispatched here, I was told you were the only one tasked with keeping an eye on the Thieves' Guild, Dante explained. I'm Dante, or at least that's what I've been called the last few weeks. Alonzo, the other inquisitor replied plainly. I've been charged with keeping an eye on a necromancer who is far too skilled for the well-being of those around him. I haven't had a good opportunity to put his practice to rest, and today I fear I may have waited too long. He struck some sort of deal with the Thieves' Guild today. Alonso's eyes narrowed sharply. I've heard whispers that one of the guild's highest-ranking members had come to this part of the city. He doesn't often leave the center of Altamir, where he's safest. If he came to Avernus, it must be for good reason. It was a Banshee scream, Dante explained. The Necromancer, Vincent Creed, he somehow found a way to trap dying screams inside a bottle, and he did such to a Banshee. The thieves now have a glass bottle that will kill everyone present if it's opened or cracked. Alonso's eyes danced about as he considered what he had just been told. The possibilities of that. There are quite a few political figures who have found their way onto the blacklist of the Thieves' Guild. People who are normally untouchable. But the assassination potential of that weapon, no amount of guards or armor could protect someone from a weapon like that. And if they only have one, they're going to make it count, Dante stressed. If we don't act now, someone quite high on that blacklist you mentioned is as good as dead. Fair enough, Alonso agreed. We're the only royal inquisitors in Avernus right now, but I have my contacts. I know Arkwright hasn't left town yet. If we can catch him before he leaves, we might be able to get that bottle before it finds its way back to the guild. How much of a presence do the Thieves' Guild have in this town? Dante asked. Enough that they sent me to keep an eye on their development, Alonso explained as he pointed across the street to a large angelic statue with a stone staircase below it, leading underground. Avernus has a winding maze of catacombs below it. It started off small and organized, but over time they just kept digging, and the winding hallways go on and on. At this point, only the thugs and pickpockets who live in those black tunnels know their way around. It's become a breeding ground of crime. They can hide from guards down there, or travel from one end of the city to the other, completely unseen. The main guild in Altamir has taken a liking to the amateurs who claimed the catacombs, and are trying to help them get organized. The Thief Guild tree is growing a new branch, so to speak. Would Arkwright be hiding down in those catacombs? Dante asked with a worried expression. I doubt it. My dossier tells me he's more refined than that. He isn't a common thief. I'll ask around and see where he's staying. They won't leave until morning. The road out of town is too dangerous at night. Meet me back here in 2 hours and bring whatever gear you have available. This could get messy. Dante nodded in agreement, and with that, Alonso turned and hurried into the darkening evening. Nightfall began to creep in over the stone city of Avernus. It had been built at the feet of nearby mountains, making shadows and icy wind a constant presence. The cutting wind would echo and moan gently as it passed over the various catacomb entrances. The large city had been built in the center of various mining towns, a focal point for the miners to come and spend the gold they had slaved away digging. But the mines in the distance had long dried up. The small towns around Avernus had dissipated, and the large stone city sat alone amongst the mountains as a distant memory of better times. The Golden Dagger Inn and Tavern was one of the city's finest establishments. It had been built at the height of Avernus's wealth. This was the inn where Arkwright had chosen to stay during his visit. In an alley outside the inn, Dante and Alonso were preparing themselves for the task ahead. "You're sure he's inside?" Dante grunted quietly as he gripped the stone wall and began to climb. "I'm sure the bottle is in his room, at any rate. My contact who works for the inn said they brought in a special leather satchel. It must have the bottle inside. They've come and gone from the room to make visits to the tavern, but that special satchel has never left the room since they brought it in." Dante had to bite his lip to keep from grunting as he scaled up the wall and into the second-story window. His fingers still ached from the spying that was done earlier in the day. The two inquisitors slipped through the window one after another, finding themselves on a second-story hallway. The two nodded to each other before splitting up. There were several long hallways within the luxurious hotel. At the end of one such hallway was an armed man guarding the suite. The thief sucked at his teeth gently in boredom. It had felt like hours since Arkwright and the others went downstairs to the tavern. His gaze shot to the right as he saw Dante turn the corner and walk his way. "Hold it right there," the thief grunted as his hand went to the hilt of his sword. "I don't know where you think you're going, but—" At that moment, Alonzo dropped from the rafters above and landed behind the thief. Before the man could turn, Alonzo had driven his dagger into the back of the man's head, where the skull and the spinal column meet. The thief jerked in place but made no noise in response to his instantaneous death. The dagger pulled from the back of his skull, and his body was eased to the floor gently. "They'll notice he's gone if they come back," Alonzo stressed as he dragged the body into a nearby closet. "All the more reason to move quickly," Dante agreed as he picked the lock of the hotel room. The two hurried inside and shut the door behind them. Within moments, the room was being torn inside out. Shelves were rapidly opened one after another. Closets were raided for their contents. "Here," Alonzo breathed in a hushed but relieved tone as he pulled a custom leather satchel from high atop one of the closets. Dante bolted to the other inquisitor as Alonzo set down the satchel as carefully as possible and opened it. "Damn it, which one?" Dante asked as he pulled one of the bottles from the bag. Each was wrapped in a thick red cloth. "They just look like empty bottles." "There has to be some kind of writing on the cork or on the cloth that they're wrapped in," Alonzo suggested. "Let's just take the whole bag. We can figure it out when—" Alonzo's sentence cut into a mumbled gasp as an arrow pierced into the side of his skull and out the other side. Dante jerked towards the direction of the door as his comrade fell dead. His free hand quickly drew a long dagger by reflex. His other hand still gripped one of the bottles. "Find yourself a nice little prize, did you?" asked Oliver Arkwright as he glared through the doorway. 3 lower-ranking thieves surrounded him, each armed with crossbows. One of the men raised his weapon, only for Arkwright to shoot his hand upward in a command to hold. Dante glanced down to the bottle in his hand and then back up at the thieves. The only reason he had not been shot on sight, like Alonzo, was because of the fragile container of death in his hands. There wasn't time to think. In a quick flash, Dante threw the dagger at the thieves, then grabbed the satchel full of bottles. The thieves parted left and right in a panic as the metal sailed through the air and impaled the wall behind them. Dante turned and jumped to the nearest window with a hard tackle, cracking the wooden frame open and diving to the street below. He was unlikely to escape alive, but he had to try. A hideous scream stabbed the night like a knife as Dante hit the ground. Both Dante and the thieves froze for a brief moment, their blood curling under their skin. It took a moment for those present to assure themselves that they were still alive. Whichever bottle had been accidentally cracked, it did not contain the Banshee scream. Dante burst to his feet and began running as crossbow bolts rained down over him. "After him," Arkwright ordered as he leaned out a window and yelled to yet more thieves on the ground below. A few had been tasked with guarding the front of the hotel. "Shoot at will, but do not hit that satchel," Arkwright commanded with grave importance. Nearly a dozen thieves were on Dante's tail now. Arkwright had kept a considerable number of bodyguards both inside the hotel and in the streets around the building. Escape was going to be difficult. These were not amateurs, but experienced members within the guild. The custom boots of a veteran thief were nearly silent, even when running. Yet somehow, Dante could almost feel their presence all around him. Silent shadows darted down alleys and around sharp corners. trying to surround him and cut off his escape. Once every few seconds, a crossbow bolt would fly past Dante and strike a nearby wall, encouraging him to keep his head low as he ran. As he turned another street, he could see a pair of shadows blocking the way before him. Instinctively, he made another turn, trying to find another route, but he was running out of options. In a moment of desperation, Dante hurled himself from the frying pan and into the fire. He ran down the stone steps of a catacombs entrance. Darkness swallowed Dante as he ran into the underground. He had taken a night sight potion before the mission, but now he could feel the effects worsening. Magic was capable of enhancing dim lights, such as turning moonlight bright as day. Pure blackness was another matter, however. As Dante ran further and further from the entrance behind him, the shadows of the walls seemed to ooze from their stone surface and consume the air. Bones that had been laid to rest littered every wall, and the toothy grin of the departed was the last thing Dante saw before it all went black. More footsteps were echoing down the winding hallways now. Dante could only hope that Arkwright's bodyguards did not know the catacombs as well as the local thieves did. All the same, he was badly outnumbered and running blind. Any unseen turn could cause his body to slap against a stone surface and crush the glass within the satchel. Dante's left hand reached out to trace along the wall beside him as his mind raced for more options. Could he fight them? Maybe they had split up, and he would be able to face them one-on-one. All of the king's royal inquisitors were well-trained combatants, but high-level enforcers within the Thieves' Guild were unlikely to be pushovers either. And while Dante still had a few daggers hidden on his person, he had geared himself for a stealth mission, not combat. Fighting them wasn't an option. Suddenly, Dante's hand could feel nothing where there had been stone before. He had reached another turn. Hoping to lose the thieves by not following a straight line, he pursued the new route. He couldn't tell what direction the echoes of the other footsteps were coming from. They seemed to be all around him. Dante flinched as his outstretched hand hit another wall. He turned to the right and continued to feel, but there was no opening. Same for the left. He had found a dead end. As he turned to go back the way he had come, he could see the faint orange glow emanating from around the corners ahead. The thieves had torches, and they were close behind him. Dante shut his eyes tight and took in a long breath. The air was cold and had a sour taste from the resting dead all around him. If he didn't want the thieves to have the bottle, there was only one option now. "Where is he?" one of the thieves hissed through their teeth. His torch danced wildly as he turned left and right, trying to inspect every nook and cranny around him. "He's down here. Don't lose your calm," a nearby thief urged his comrade as he loaded a bolt into his crossbow. "Easy for you to say. Look, I'm not going to be the one to explain it to Arkwright if—" A thief choked on his words as a desperate, howling scream shook the silence of the catacombs. Within a moment, another scream rang out, this one a pleading no, which reached a higher and higher note before trembling away. "He's breaking the bottles," one of the thieves cried out in dismay. "Find him, now!" Their footsteps bolted like cannon fire, turning the corner where the screams had echoed from. As they ran, their torches began to illuminate a figure in the distance. Crack! Another scream cut into the night. "Kill him!" one of the thieves shrieked as crossbows fired wildly all around Dante's distant shadow. Crack! Another scream. The thieves were almost upon him now. Crack! Another scream. Crack!